What's your go-to sandwich filling? Cheese, lettuce, egg? We often find ourselves thinking about the ingredients we like to see in our sandwiches. But when's the last time you thought about the type of bread used for that sandwich? To clear up any loaves of confusion and help you make better and healthier choices, today we'll be diving into all these differences and helping you figure out what your next slice of bread should be.
Before we get started, it's important to know about dietary reference intakes for certain nutrients and what nutrients you may be under or over consuming. By assessing recent blood work, health concerns, and risks that you may have, as well as speaking to a healthcare practitioner, you can determine which nutrients you need to start including more or less of in your diet.
So is bread bad for you? It can be high in carbohydrates and lack essential nutrients. Yet bread is a staple food in diets across the world and has been consumed for thousands of years. How beneficial bread can be depends on the type of bread you choose, its nutrient profile, and your level of consumption. By choosing more nutrient-rich breads and consuming them in moderation, bread can be included as a part of a balanced diet. Before we compare some of these options, let's assess some of the nutrients we should be looking at on the nutrition label.
So in our previous video, Have You Been Looking at That Label?, which is linked below, we discussed how to read nutrition facts tables. So how do we assess the nutrition facts table of a loaf of bread while keeping Canada's dietary reference intakes in mind? First of all, breads are high carbohydrate foods. This means that bread can be a source of fiber, which is an indigestible carbohydrate that can either be soluble, which helps to lower cholesterol and control blood sugar levels, or insoluble, which aids in bowel movement. Most breads will contain insoluble fibers. However, whole grain breads, which we will discuss later, can contain things like oats and barley, which are sources of soluble fiber. Whole grains, unlike refined grains, keep the outer bran of the grain intact, which contains healthy fibers. For males, the DRI for dietary fiber is 38 grams per day for ages 19 to 50 and 30 grams per day for over 51 years. For adult females, the DRI is 25 grams per day for ages 19 to 50, and then 21 grams per day for over 51 years.
Now, breads can also be a source of sugars, carbohydrates that are less beneficial to your diet, especially in those with diabetes. Due to natural sugars present in flours, those produced in the breakdown of starch in the fermentation process, and as well as added sugars that are added for preservation or taste, different breads will have different sugar contents. More refined grains have a higher glycemic index and thus a higher risk of metabolic diseases. There is no DRI for sugars, and instead individuals should focus on reducing their total and added sugar intakes. Look for breads with between 0 to 1 grams of sugar per serving, and those without added sugars in the ingredient list. And then limit consumption of breads like raisin and cinnamon bread, which can really be equivalent to eating candy. And reduce consumption of fast food breads from places like Subway that can be marketed as healthy, but actually contain hidden sugars.
So while white breads and whole grain breads may have similar sugar contents, it's really important to note that refined grains have a higher glycemic index than whole grains. This is primarily due to the processing of the grains and hence the higher fiber content in whole grains, which can improve insulin sensitivity and glucose metabolism. Thus, whole grains can better control blood sugar levels, especially for individuals with diabetes.
Another nutrient to look at is protein. While breads may not be the highest in protein, whole grain breads can be high in plant-based protein. Most whole grain breads can have between 3 to 6 grams of protein per slice, and this is because of their ingredients such as whole wheat flour, rye, oats, millet, barley, and other naturally containing protein ingredients. Bread can also be a source of vitamins and minerals, including B group vitamins, thiamine, riboflavin, niacin, and folate, which aid in cell function. Whole grain breads retain the bran or outer layer of the grain, which is rich in B vitamins and other micronutrients such as iron, copper, zinc, magnesium, and antioxidants. To assess your individual DRIs for these essential nutrients, use the following link in the description box. Once you can determine what your health needs are, you can start selecting a type of bread that works best for you.
So now moving on to the difference between white and whole wheat breads. We always grow up hearing how whole wheat bread is so much better for us than white bread, but it's likely that few of us really took the time to ever learn and understand why this is. So the main difference between white and whole wheat bread lies in how processed they are. The flour for both types of bread is actually made from the same source, which is wheat berries. So wheat berries are the edible part of a whole wheat kernel, and they contain 3 parts: the outer bran layer, the innermost germ area, and the starchy endosperm in between the two. In terms of the sweet berry, white flour only contains the endosperm, whereas whole wheat flour includes all three of the nutritious parts. And because of this, white flour is very highly refined and it lacks the nutrients and fibers which are key for multidisciplinary aspects of digestive and cardiac health. On the other hand, whole wheat flour is less refined and is therefore much richer in nutrients.
Now let's compare these breads and their NFTs. Here we have Wonder Bread White and Country Harvest 14 grains. Per serving or 2 slices, we can first see that the whole grain bread has 3 times more fiber for the same amount of carbs, with 6 grams compared to 2 grams in the white bread. The whole grain bread also contains more protein, with 10 grams compared to 7 grams in the white. It also contains 2.5 times more potassium, as well as higher percent daily values and amounts of essential nutrients such as niacin, vitamin B6, and magnesium. While these commercial whole grain breads contain more sugars, its added sugars are further on the ingredient list. However, for those considering a more diabetic-friendly bread, we suggest looking for breads with lower amounts of sugar, no added sugars, and a high fiber content. We will explore this in our next grocery store video.
Moving on to rye breads, compared to other types of breads, rye breads can also be higher in micronutrients, fibers, and B vitamins. So it's also very interesting to recognize the distinction between light and dark rye breads, which lies in the amount of bran left in the rye flour after processing. So the more bran that there is, the more nutrients there are, and the darker the flour becomes. So for a direct comparison, light rye contains 1.3% sugars, 21% fibers, and 17.5% proteins, whereas dark rye contains 3.2% sugars, 62.6% fibers, and 24.8% proteins for the same 100-gram portion.
Now for whole grain breads, this type of bread introduces very similar health benefits to whole wheat bread, but is made using any type of whole grain kernel instead of just one type, such as oats or barley that include the bran, germ, and endosperm. These breads are usually the healthiest breads that you can purchase from the grocery store, as they are comparatively more rich in nutrients than other bread types. These grains provide very specific and additional health benefits as they are rich in soluble fibers, which help regulate blood sugar and cholesterol levels, as previously mentioned, and insoluble fibers that improve gastrointestinal health. Whole grains are also associated with anti-inflammatory effects, antioxidant properties, as well as lower gastric emptying and reduced waist circumference and weight loss.
But how do you know how much whole grains are actually in your bread products? So it's recommended that you make at least half of the grains that you consume whole grains. Products must contain at least 8 grams of whole grains per serving to bear a whole grain stamp. The 10-to-1 ratio rule can help you determine this. So if the carbohydrate to fiber ratio on your NFT is 10-to-1 or less, it can be considered a whole grain product. For example, this bread here contains 38 grams of carbohydrate per serving and 6 grams of fiber. So the ratio comes out to be about 6.33 to 1, and thus it can be considered whole grain.
Now, a quick consumer warning we want to mention is something that applies when looking at the bread aisle in your local grocery store. You should always make sure to keep an eye out for the term 100% whole grain on the package. Just seeing the term made with whole grains without a percentage isn't enough, because this refers to bread that's made mostly with refined white flour. Another term to look out for is enriched, which is just used to indicate that some nutrients have been added to otherwise nutrient-free white bread.
So another topic that we want to touch on in this video concerns the electrolytes sodium and potassium, as well as salt, which is sodium chloride. So potassium is known to help decrease blood pressure and provide cardioprotective benefits against things like heart diseases and stroke. On the other hand, having too much sodium intake from salt can contribute to things like high blood pressure and disturbed fluid balances in our body, potentially leading to hypertension and increasing risks of cardiovascular events down the road. Therefore, it's really important to keep a good balance of these two electrolytes.
Seeing high sodium levels as a significant and frequent modern health issue, multiple trials were conducted in China investigating the health impacts of sodium chloride versus a potassium-enriched salt substitute. In addition to a control group consuming regular salt, an experimental group received the potassium-enriched substitute, which consisted of 25% potassium chloride and 75% sodium chloride. After around 5 years of follow-up, it was found that the salt substitute group experienced around 14% less stroke, 13% lower risk of major cardiovascular events, and 12% less risk of death than the control group, which proves the benefits of lowering sodium intake. And as seen here, potassium chloride can be used as a great salt substitute that can be used when baking or cooking, especially for those of you who know you need to watch your sodium levels. For anyone who makes their own bread though, keep in mind that you do need some sodium chloride to activate properties in baking, and because this is a substance, it provides structure and allows these to rise properly.
So to apply these concepts to store-bought options, we recommend looking for low-sodium breads by using the nutrition label reading skills that we have developed in our videos. In our next video, we will be taking you into the grocery store to assess some of these options. But for now, we hope that you've learned a little more about the different types of breads available at the grocery store and their associated health benefits. Hopefully, you can now make your sandwich with the healthiest bread for you. And as always, make sure to keep checking that label.